Welcome to the Be Nice podcast, where we dive into conversations that will help us recognize, understand, and take action when it comes to mental health. I'm Christy Buck. I'm the host of your show, and this is the Be Nice podcast. So, what is the Be Nice action plan? The Be Nice action plan has 4 simple steps to change, improve, and save lives. Let me tell you about the plan. First step is to notice. Notice the good and the right, so then you are able to notice the differences in an individual, the onset of a mental health disorder. Next, invite yourself into a conversation. Invite yourself to have those great conversations with a person about what you've noticed. Step 3, challenge. Challenge the stigma. Stigma is the number one barrier to people seeking help and treatment. And lastly, empower. Empower yourself to support this individual with love and helping them to find those resources that are available to them. That is where an individual can get hope. Our first guest and our guest today for this episode is Judd Efiinger. Judd sustained the loss of his son to suicide, and he will be sharing his journey, the love that he had for his son, and ultimately what he has learned from his death. Let's first, as we always do, we're going to start off with a myth that we're going to bust today. And that myth that we are going to bust is that mental illness is a permanent condition, that there is no hope. That is a myth. And the fact is that recovery is possible with good treatment. We know that when we see and we notice the onset of a mental health disorder, the sooner that we can get that person help and treatment, the sooner that they are on the road to recovery. Oftentimes, for any illness, just like physical illnesses, when you get help and treatment, i.e., doctor, medication, you can get better and potentially you can resume those activities that you loved before the illness came on. Many people's journey in recovery may be very different. For some folks, recovery means that I'm going to go back to the way I was, go back to my job. I'm going to feel where I felt before the illness came on. For others, recovery means lessening those symptoms that came with the illness. So we know recovery is possible. Oftentimes in someone's journey, they may get sick. They may get so sick that they do have thoughts of suicide, that at that point where they are having thoughts of suicide, they actually follow through with a plan that they may have. So today, I have a special guest, and I got to know this gentleman through another friend of mine, and we'll talk a little bit about that journey, how we met too. But joining us today is Judd. Judd, can you tell us a little bit more about your journey and specifically about your son, Kyler?
Yeah, thanks for having me, Christy. Yeah, Judd Efiinger. I'm president of the Love Light Kai Foundation here in Sun Valley, Idaho. And unfortunately, we lost our son a year ago, New Year's Day, to a tragic accident at the Salt Lake City airport. And he essentially had a 4-hour plus long mental breakdown at the airport, and made his way out to the runway, where he passed away. So tragic death. It ended up being very public. So he made it on to Good Morning America, a day later. So we really, as a family, were sort of forced into addressing mental illness right from the start. Some of the early reporting kind of came back as a drug episode, and we knew that was wrong, and immediately got back to the media with the message of mental illness and mental well-being. So we've been on a journey now of just over a year, and we've started a foundation in his honor. And our mission is to enrich the mental well-being of citizens in ski towns. So we're focusing on ski towns for our early mission.
Judd, I remember seeing that news story, and immediately, because I do what I do for a living, I recognized and had that gut feeling that this young man was struggling, and what a struggle that must have been, and how painful that illness must have been for him to bring himself to do something like that, and how desperate he was. I know there was some things going on in his life at that time that could have been those risk factors that brought about even more of a psychotic type of episode for him. Can you share a little bit of those risk factors for us that he experienced? I know you've become super knowledgeable about this also, and you also lived this journey with Kyler. So lend a little bit to our audience today about those risk factors.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, so, Kyler struggled with bipolar, for a decade. So he was diagnosed as a freshman year in college and, passed away when he was 30. So, a long journey for him and a long journey for the family. So we had been through a few manic episodes, and, for those who are learning about bipolar, it's the extremes of deep depression and the highs of manic episode. So it's under those manic episodes that, you're really in a high risk environment. And unfortunately, this happened at a public international airport, New Year's Day. And he was off to see, my father, his grandfather, who had just had a heart attack, in Denver. So he was off to, to say his goodbyes. And so I think that high stress environment of an airport and his personal suffering just elevated into a really bad situation.
So I want to let our listeners know that 50% of those diagnosed with a mental health disorder, the symptoms came on by the age of 14 years old, and 75% by the age of 24. So right now we're learning in this podcast also that it is a brain illness, a brain disease. Oftentimes, bipolar disorder isn't necessarily diagnosed during early years. And sadly so, it's often when someone has that first psychotic episode is when they receive a diagnosis of bipolar disorder or schizoaffective disorder or schizophrenia. And it's not a life sentence. We just said that about my myth that I'm trying to bust today, right? That mental health problems are permanent. That is a myth. So was Kyler ever responsive to medications that he may have been put on?
Yeah. So he had, in that 10-year period, maybe 3 or 4, pretty significant manic episodes. And all of those, ended in a mental hospital with heavy medication. And, he would typically stay on medication for 6 months or so. He didn't love how the medication sort of changed his personality. So, as an adult, parents, couldn't really, dictate the medication. So he often would go off, his meds, or at least the ones he felt like were changing his personality. And this is just a really valuable lesson for other parents and families is, he chose, maybe when he was 23, to get his medical marijuana license in Utah, which he was able to get, and then self-medicate with marijuana and cannabis. And, I think that made him feel good, but all the research is pretty clear that, it both increases the frequency, and the magnitude of the future manic episodes. And that is how it played out. So that's just a great lesson for other families that are going through this is, to seek professional help, professional medication, and not self-medicate.
And, we just appreciate you being involved with us and spreading this message throughout these ski towns, because it is really super important that people understand that You know, drugs, alcohol, we'll just go to the drug being marijuana. It does affect the brain chemistry. And for those who potentially have had a mental health disorder or have a history in their family of having a mental health disorder, that marijuana can actually bring about that change, that chemical imbalance, even at a faster rate. So we need to be mindful of having conversations and becoming knowledgeable about, our family members, our parents, our grandparents, that uncle that spent time at a facility, whatever it is. We got to break down that barrier and talk about these things. And I appreciate you. And it's really hard now to look back and say, wow, now I'm doing this reading, right? But tell us a little about your journey and what you want to do with Love Light Kai, because we are very excited to be partnering with you. I just think that we've got a champion amongst us in this survivor of such a loss.
Yeah, thanks. So our early research, we were surprised to find we lived in Park City, a ski town in Utah, for 30 years, and then moved to Sun Valley. And we thought we were living in these paradise, mountain communities, but we were shocked to find out, that the CDC is actually labeled, a suicide belt, which basically runs from Montana to New Mexico, and 7 of the top 10 states with the highest suicide rate fall in those Rocky Mountains. So there's a ton of work to do to try to get to the bottom of why all of that's happening. But there's no doubt the party culture, the big discrepancies in income, the change of seasons, the other sort of extreme side of extreme sports and dopamine levels. And there are some studies around the effects of altitude on brain development. So we're kind of digging into all of that, but really what shocked us was that, these ski towns have suicide rates 2 or 3 times the national average. So it's just, it's going to require a collective. We're going to work with 6 mountain towns this winter and then work on a summer program. But we can only solve this problem if all the mountain towns share their best practices and their solutions together. And then we can take those best practices to the other mountain towns.
Yeah, and I look at mental illness like I look at physical illnesses. It's just so fair to let people know what are some of the risk factors. Just like we talk about for lung cancer, don't smoke, don't do this, don't do that. And I love that you're going to be getting this information. And from losing Kyler, I think you've become much more knowledgeable about those risk factors. And I love that you're going to be able to go out and let people know. I think that getting the parents, and we're going to take your information too, in our partnership right now and getting even more information out there as you start your journey along these presentations. We're going to be following you, and we're going to be doing social media and making sure we get all this out so we can just plug you into so many places. It's difficult to be here, and I know that oftentimes that grief, that very complicated grief after losing someone to suicide, people don't know what to do. How did you get that energy? What brought you to this place? Was it anger? Was it your sadness? How'd you get here? And oftentimes people who might be listening today, they are survivors of a loss. Can you help them out, Judd?
Yeah. So, I had this, a good friend, just send me it was actually written in a handbook, his journal from a book he had read, talking about grief and loss. And the misnomer is that grief gets smaller over time. So his picture had a series of 5 circles, and the big circle was life, and the small circle was grief. And it showed it getting smaller over time. What this message is that grief actually doesn't get smaller. It will always be with you, particularly, direct family members. with tragic loss. So the grief circle then stays the same, in that you have to grow your life circle to make your life bigger. And it really was that metaphor of those circles that sort of changed our family's trajectory. We just immediately knew that for us to make our life bigger, we had to help the next family. And if we can help the next family, then we can save the next life. So that is the legacy that we want for Kai.
Man, I just love that your friend reached out. And oftentimes after a family loses a loved one to suicide, people don't know what to say. And I want to remind people today that a loss is a loss, and reaching out to that family can potentially help in that journey of making that circle of life bigger. So here we are, and I know that you had a good friend, also another friend who you played soccer with back in college, and he somehow reached out, right?
Yeah.
And Small World would be...
was my, maybe just a few years older, but he was my soccer captain in college. And, we chased him around at Hope College in Holland, Michigan. So, when he reached out, he kind of heard our message and knew that we were on this mission to help the next family. And the other thing that we knew early on is that we wanted to have an education piece. And so he immediately put us in touch, with the Be Nice organization, for an education piece. I mean, so, our son spent over 4 hours in an international airport having a mental breakdown. They say, 100,000 people were going through that airport that day, and not a single person helped him. And that's just such a tragedy, and speaks to the stigma of mental illness. Is I think folks just didn't feel like they had the tools or the education to help. So my guess is that they did notice. I've seen the videos from the airport. So they had the they had the notice, but they just did not invite themselves to have a conversation with him. And if someone had, maybe they could have saved his life, literally. Just put their arm around him and said, "Hey, buddy, looks like you're having a tough day. How can we help?" Could have changed, his life. So, that's when we knew, that we needed a tool, an educational tool, that could help us on our, mountain town journey to really educate folks and have a tool that they can use when they witness, a mental episode.
And sometimes that piece, and it is something else to watch the video, and I did see it. You did share that with me, and I'm sure that for folks, they're in a hurry, they're rushing, but they're also noticing. You can't miss when people are behaving in a way that is different, right? And at that point, I want to remind people that if you get involved, you can always use the system that's in place, and that is a 911 situation. A lot of times, most of the time, these folks now are trained also in having these conversations with people that might be experiencing a psychotic episode. And honestly, the best thing we can do is to help that person get in a safe spot where they may not harm themselves or potentially harm others. When somebody is experiencing a psychotic episode, no, they are possibly not going to be responsive to people talking to them. They may be experiencing auditory hallucinations. They may be delusional. And at that point, it is important that we enter in to get them help in any way that we can get it to them. When people experiencing these episodes, they report that they're not thinking about other people right now. They're thinking about how that they can get out of this pain, or how that they can solve this situation that they're in right now that they have the inability to solve. And I kind of look back, and after hearing Kyler's story, I really think that he just wanted to get on that plane to get to his grandfather. And for folks, remember that people who have and who are struggling with mental illness, they have family. They are loved. There is hope, and potentially there is good treatment. So now, Judd, tell me, what's the schedule? Where are you going to be? You're going to be hitting the road. You're in Sun Valley. And where does your tour, where's it going to start? Where's it beginning?
Yeah. So we are going to start it in Sun Valley. We had just a little hiccup in the start of our tour. Unfortunately, we had a young gal commit suicide here in our valley who happened to be on the ski team, just days before our first scheduled event. So we have postponed. I think everyone knows February is a really difficult month for ski towns with ski week and all the visitations. So we're now on a March schedule, which puts us on the sort of spring skiing side of things. But we're on track, to have a tour stop every Saturday in March and April. So super excited about that. We will start in Sun Valley, and then we're off to Park City and Aspen as our first 3 stops.
So will our listeners, will they be able to follow the journey? How can they connect with you?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, so we will, in fact, be posting on social media. I mean, we do have a website, which is lovelikekai.org, and Kai is K-Y, lovelikekai.org. And then we will be posting social media. We actually haven't put those sites up yet. My daughter, who's much more adept at this, tells me that, we want to wait for content, from the actual events to launch our social media. So that'll be coming in March, and we'll probably do some teases in February to promote the events. But those sites are not live yet.
Well, I know that we will be on just this excitement roll of following you and your journey. And we can't thank you enough for taking and making Be Nice part of it, that simple action plan that people can use when they notice changes in a loved one's behavior. I want to thank everybody today for listening to today's episode. I want to thank Judd so much for being part of our journey, for affiliating yourself with us. We're super proud of our product, but when we see others who are inspired to take the plan and teach others, that's even more important. I kind of feel like we busted a myth today. Do you agree with me, Judd?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's we're on this journey to make mental health as strong and is paid attention to as much as physical health, and we're on that journey. And I just look forward to the day that we all can talk about anxiety the same as we can talk about a broken wrist. So we'll get there. It's just going to take hard work and companies like ours to get the word out.
I'm a believer. So we hope that by sharing these stories like Kyler's, we're going to make a difference, and maybe that we've made a difference today with you understanding more about mental health, mental illness. If today's episode resonated with you, make sure you share it with someone else. If you know someone who has lost a loved one to suicide, share this podcast. And most of all, click on to benice.org and take the pledge, learn more. Remember that if you know someone who is struggling, if you yourself is struggling, there is help. There is the crisis hotline, 988, and in addition, you can text 741-741. Text NICE to that number. They will respond to you immediately. And don't forget to follow us on social media, where we also will be sharing Judd's journey and taking Kyler's story on the road. Again, this is Christy Buck, and I thank you. Be nice.
This podcast is made possible in part by the Kent County Medical Society Alliance.